Tonight, British Columbia's disturbing drug crisis as the Canadian province battles soaring death fatalities, and Saudi Arabia offers financial support to the Palestinian Authority in a bid for Saudi-Israel normalization. Later in the show, we revisit an interview with Rabia Khidr on medical assistance in dying for persons with disabilities.
People with disabilities are finding themselves in poverty because they don't have access to employment.
Assalamu alaikum. Good evening. This is Muslim News Canada on Muslim Network TV. I'm Catherine Bullock. British Columbia has set a dubious record with 1,455 people dying from drug poisoning in the first 7 months of this year. A report released by the coroner's office yesterday shows it is the highest number recorded in any year. British Columbia has been battling with drug poisoning since 2016, when the province declared a public health emergency. In a statement, the chief coroner said that record numbers were due to a toxic drug supply. At the current rate, 2,383 drug deaths will occur this year. The report shows that the main cause for the crisis is illicit fentanyl, a powerful synthetic opioid analgesic. The coroner says the province needs to act fast to widen access to a safe drug supply. Ground-penetrating radar has unearthed 79 potential children's graves and those that may be of 14 infants at the former Beauval Indian Residential School in Saskatchewan. In a news conference yesterday, English River First Nation Chief Jenny Wolverine called the findings not a final number. The Indigenous band began the search 2 years ago. Wolverine says the search was based on historical stories communicated through time. Wolverine says the finding of possible grave sites is the beginning of a, quote, long and difficult journey. English River First Nation is located in the north of Saskatchewan. Beauval Indian Residential School opened there in 1860. It was run by a Roman Catholic mission until 1969. The school officially closed in 1983 when it was given to the 10 Meadow Lake bands, which include English River First Nation. It was demolished in 1995. Survivors have also reported being sexually abused at the school. Saudi Arabia is seeking to provide new financial support to gain Palestinian endorsement for an Israel normalization agreement. The story has been reported by the Wall Street Journal. It says Saudi officials view this as a strategic move to counter accusations of abandoning the Palestinian cause, especially after ending aid in 2021. The Palestinian Authority is debating whether to support Saudi Arabia's bid. They will send a delegation to discuss creating an independent Palestinian state. Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman introduced the aid reinstatement idea during an April meeting with Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas. The aid isn't directly tied to endorsing Saudi-Israel normalization. Instead, it is meant to boost the Palestinian Authority's legitimacy in areas in the West Bank where it has lost control. There has been escalating violence in the West Bank involving Israeli settler attacks and military raids. Saudi leaders told the Biden administration they believe the Palestinian Authority could support normalization, even without a Palestinian state. However, the Palestinian Authority's sway is limited, as it is widely seen as illegitimate. For more on medical assistance in dying for persons with disabilities, stay tuned. The Quran teaches us that human life is sacred. It prohibits suicide. In Canada, over the last few years, the government has been expanding eligibility to its medically assisted death or MAID law. To talk to us today about how medical assistance in dying intersects with disability rights and anti-poverty advocacy, we are joined now by Rabia Khidr, National Director of an organization called Disability Without Poverty. Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the show.
Wa alaikum salam. Thank you.
You've been with us before talking about issues related to disability and poverty, and this one seems to be a newly important issue, although it's been around in Canada for a while. How has your organisation, if it has at all, been reacting to these laws about medical assistance in dying?
Well, essentially, we've been advocating for the Canada Disability Benefit, which is Bill C-22 in Parliament right now, which would offer a supplemental benefit to people with disabilities living in poverty across the country. One of the reasons that people with disabilities are choosing medical assistance in dying or MAID is because they feel they have no option to live with dignity. And everybody fundamentally, universally, deserves dignity. So when the conversation is happening around poverty, is happening around assisted dying, we are highlighting this specific message that the government has a job to do. It has an obligation to provide people a supplemental benefit that meets their basic needs to be able to live with dignity.
We saw in the news some very sad stories. One of them was from a veteran who was in a wheelchair. She'd been at the Paralympics, and she was claiming that someone at Veteran Affairs Canada was offering her medical assistance in dying when all she'd call in was asked for help with getting a wheelchair ramp. And she made a comment that really struck me. She said something like, "You're going to help me die, but you're not going to help me live." How does that sentiment intersect with the advocacy you're doing with that bill that you just mentioned?
Well, again, it's that very thing, that there are services, supports that people need. There are basic needs that people have. People with disabilities are finding themselves in poverty because they don't have access to employment. They face all kinds of barriers to reaching their full potential in order to earn adequately to thrive. And this was true before the pandemic. So people with disabilities lived in poverty. In fact, 41% of people living in poverty are disabled. And this was true before the pandemic. This got even deeper during the pandemic. And as we're finding ourselves economically struggling with inflation, it got deeper and deeper and deeper now.
So somebody who is having pain from a disability is also in poverty and sees the only solution is to apply for medical assistance in dying. Is that what you're sort of pointing to?
Well, yes, people with invisible disabilities who you wouldn't even recognize as having disabilities, like fibromyalgia, like a woman that I participated with on another interview, Jackie. Jackie lives in poverty, and she told her story. And essentially, she struggles with managing her pain on a daily basis. And because she's struggling financially, she sought out MAID as a potential option. There have been several stories, people being offered it or even considering it. Nobody should have to consider dying as the only way out of poverty in a first world nation.
It seems, in fact, incredible that that's what's happening. And it just brings me back to what that vet had said, you want to help me die, but you don't want to help me live. And yet I sense that the conversations seem to be happening in parallel tracks. There's the whole conversation about medical assistance in dying and, dying with dignity and alleviating pain. And then there's the whole conversations about anti-poverty or helping people with disability live. I don't see a lot of intersection, or am I missing that conversation? And you're very well aware of it.
Well, again, MAID is a privileged option. People with privilege who, have all the means also want to seek out death because their means will not, quote unquote, end any physical hardship that they're facing. So medical assistance in dying is, an option for them to die with dignity. But they're able to meet their basic needs. Lawmakers who have voted for MAID, who have institutionalized this law, are putting forward a privilege. Like Professor Trudeau Lemons said, it's not like you're giving people with disabilities the dignity to die. The option to die has always been there. People can choose to end their lives. They have that choice. Now we've just put a whole medical framework, a legal framework around it that's really unnecessary. And legally, what we're doing now is expanding the qualifiers, the medical qualifiers for eligibility. So we have considered expanding mental illness as one of those medical needs that people can seek out to remedy through medical assistance in dying. And that to me is a very, very slippery slope. We had an ugly history in this country before World War I and even thereafter around euthanizing people with disabilities, around institutionalizing them, sterilizing them. In fact, our laws that institutionalized and sterilized people with disabilities were studied by the Holocaust master himself, Hitler. So we have this ugly, ugly history of wanting to eradicate people with disabilities from our society. And now we are justifying this through a very privileged piece of legislation where we are giving people the legal right to die, even if they are mentally unstable. In that moment of stability, we're saying, yes, equal rights, you have the right to choose to die. It's very frightening to me. It just reeks of how we are valuing disabled bodies now.
I hope to have time to come back to something that you said, but I just want to throw in a puzzle that I have as well over this whole issue. I heard on the radio yesterday an organization which is making an appeal to stop suicide amongst young people. And then on the other hand, we have this medical assistance in dying. So is our society feels confused or something? Can you sort of speak to that?
Absolutely. It's a contradiction. It's an absolute contradiction. From one end, we're putting all this money, but you know what? We're a country based on contradictions, right? Like we legalize certain street drugs, and then we have drug rehab programs. We are building casinos, and then we have gambling rehab programs to protect people. And now we're doing the same thing with the idea of assisted death. That, on one hand, it's suicide, and we have to have all these prevention programs to help people not choose that as a way out. And yet, but you know what? If you're really in that much pain, if you're really terminal, if you're really struggling with mental illness, et cetera, we're going to give you a way out legally to commit suicide. I think it's just easing our guilty social conscience as a society that prides itself on certain values.
Well, we've got about 30 seconds left. I don't know if this is even possible. Can you just explain a little bit more about what you meant by MAID being a privilege? Again,
people who live with privilege, so people who have the means to thrive, rich people, they cannot deal with their medical needs through their resources. So, here's a good framework for them to die in a classy way. And I'm being harsh, I recognize that. But it's because I really struggle with the fact that we are creating a slippery slope for people with disabilities to have to choose MAID because we're not giving them the programs and services and supports and the financial means to live with basic dignity.
And we're out of time, but obviously the call that you're making is help people live with their basic needs, a basic income or something like that. Thank you for joining us, Rabia, today.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching. If you like what we do, please share, like, and subscribe. Stay safe and God bless.